Hi, and welcome to Thete Gaming, and it's another look at the Dragonflight Alpha Retribution Paladin talents. There's been an update this week. My first impression actually was, oh my goodness, do not like. There are some interesting things though, there are some positives. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what I think are the good features. I'm going to go over what I think are some features that I think are retrograde steps really, and then I'm going to go over a couple of issues facing Retribution Paladin in general that will make it quite difficult for Blizzard to come to a satisfactory balancing of the spec. So if we start off with the spec, so I've played about with one here. So in terms of major changes, in terms of benefits, the Ret portion of the tree was changed a lot. A lot of changes in there. Now, this is a positive because even though my initial thought when I looked at it was, oh, no, this is worse than before, on balance, there are some improvements. It shows that Blizzard are making improvements to Retribution, because it could easily have been the case that they released the Ret talent tree fairly early on in the alpha because it's like, look, we're not really that bothered. We think this is good enough for Ret Paladins or Paladins in general, and here you go. We'll tinker, but we're not going to do a great deal, because in the second build they did move cleanse toxins. It was over here. They moved up to that. That was a big improvement. Makes it much easier to take that now for Mythic plus dungeons. So I see it as a positive that they made big changes, even though I think I would like to see big changes again and maybe some of them put back. The other positive, so let's get around the fact at the moment, the problem with Retribution Paladin is it's actually quite squishy, and I'm not going to go over old ground. I talked about this in the last video, so you could check that out. But although, yes, we've got invulnerabilities there on a long cooldown there for emergency use, not part of the strategy of a raid fight. For that, you want shorter cooldown damage reductions, so that you can either have something like what Divine Protection used to be, which would give you a damage reduction, a modest damage reduction every minute. So you could, whenever there's like big raid-wide damage coming in, you can reduce that. Or maybe something with a longer cooldown like the 2-minute Shaman ability that does 40% damage reduction. Maybe you could only use that once every couple of times, depending on the fight, but it's still allowing you to reduce a lot of damage through the fight. We don't get any of that. We don't get any utility either, whether it be unique or something that's shared with other classes. All of the utility that people would claim, as I said in the last video, is single use. All of it is single use, and it's all in the Paladin tree. So it's not Ret, it's Holy and Protection Paladin. There's nothing at all in the Retribution tree other than, where have I got it? Consecration, reducing movement speed for mobs. So, you know, in Mythic Plus dungeons, that could be quite handy. So what is it that Retribution Paladins do excel in? Well, there is something, and it has been the case for several years, or quite a lot of years, in fact, and that's burst damage. Okay, whether, like, some people will look at the damage overall in a fight and go, oh, it's not necessarily all that great. That's not necessarily how you kill a raid boss. You kill a raid boss by meeting tight DPS checks. And it's not unusual in a fight for a 20 or 30 second window to open up where you have to unload massive amounts of damage if you are to tame that fight. It might be that a very unpleasant ad spawns in, and if you leave it up too long, it's going to cause you a lot of trouble. So you save your cooldowns to burst that down really quickly. It could be the boss. The boss could take a debuff, which means that it takes an amplified amount of damage, and that's your burst window to be able to beat the fight. Retribution Paladins do really well in that. There have been times in the past where, in actual fact, when it comes to burst, there was nothing to touch a Ret Paladin. That may or may not be the case in Dragonflight. I don't know, because that'll be partly a tuning issue. But the tools are definitely there for the burst. But Avenging Wrath is very much part of that burst. It's not baseline, so we do have to talent for it. I'm not entirely happy that I have to spend a talent point for it here, then get Blessing of Protection, which in a lot of cases is useless in a lot of raid fights, and then I have to go through it to get the cooldown reduction. In fact, I have to get that to get any of these fairly nice talents. I'm not happy about that, but you know, you get that. Now, one of the big improvements, I know there's a bit of a preamble here, is your Crusade, or you know, your Avenging Wrath might if you want. The two possible abilities that buff your Avenging Wrath. Now, it used to be down here. The problem with it being down here towards the end is it made it more difficult to get certain builds. Putting it up here near the middle means it's now very easy to get it. I mean, if you look at what you have to get it, you have to get Shield of Vengeance. Well, we've sort of been used to having that anyway. You have to get Wake of Ashes. I don't think anyone's going to complain about that. I'm not saying Wake of Ashes would always be part of any build anyone would want with these talents, but it's a very popular ability, and I think it's a very good ability. So it's no great hardship to take the path that gets you this. No problem at all. Whereas there were more decisions, there were maybe more compromises needed down there. So that's the benefit. There are some interesting builds possible with this, but where I have a few little issues, and some of them will be subjective, and I think some of them not so much. So the first thing, and I said this after the first build, and I said it again after the second build, and I'm going to say it after the third build, take away for now the utility and mitigations like damage reduction and so on. As a Retribution Paladin, you have this tree. What you want to do is to be able to have different kits for different scenarios. That is the whole point of being able to customize your talents, because the whole point in Dragonflight is you create yourself a whole series of different builds and use whichever one is suitable for that encounter or content, whatever. So at its simplest level, one of them is likely to be single target. You're going to be doing single target damage on the boss. That's what you're going to be doing on that fight, and that's what you want to talent for. You want to maximize your single target damage. The other side of it is maybe where adds are more important. Even if it's a boss fight, the adds are more important to burst down. So you want something like, you've got things like Divine Storm does 100% more damage in your Consecration, things like that. And your Consecration can be larger. Where is that? Oh, that's Consecration's damage. Oh, that's the larger one. So you've got things like that. And the Divine Storm projection, again, we've got that baked into a talent. Or it could be a Mythic Plus dungeon where, again, the bosses are all right, and really where you need to focus your damage to make the time is the trash. So the AoE is really important. So you want to be able to come up with a build that's really strong on the AoE. Now, this has always been confused. I think they've confused it even more. See, here's the problem. Generally speaking, it was the case in the first two builds. Down the right-hand side here, there was your single target stuff. Down the left-hand side was your AoE stuff. But there were a few aberrations. Now, this is still here, your Divine Storm projecting forwards. Anything, I mean, Divine Storm's over there. Various AoE abilities are over here. Why is a Divine Storm ability, which is not improving it for single target, by the way, it's helping you in AoE, why is it over on the right? And then if you look on I mean, they've at least moved, I think they had the Consecration, I think might have been over there. I can't remember exactly. But then over here you've got, something like Righteous Verdict, pure single target. Exorcism, pure single target. They're on the left. And the thing is, they've made it more confused, I feel, because a couple of other changes. Zeal and Boundless Judgment used to be like one of these choice things, and it was sort of roughly over here, and you could easily bypass it. If you didn't want either of them, you could easily bypass it. Now you can take both, which might please some people, but you sort of have to take Zeal. Realistically, you have to take Zeal to get any of these shiny. And remember, if you want, if you want to really max out on single target DPS, of course you'd want Righteous Verdict. If you want to be really good in AoE, of course you're going to want something like Calm Before the Storm, and there's a few other examples as well. And all okay, you can get Calm Before the Storm without Zeal, but the Righteous Verdict, you need Zeal. If you want to increase your judgment damage, or you want to get this where it's judgment has a chance to chain to a nearby enemy, you need Zeal. There's like so much you need Zeal for now. It's not a bad talent, but I just don't see why it should be such a gateway talent. Other things I'm not so keen on is this Divine Toll here. I actually don't like Divine... Now, this is purely subjective, right? I don't like Divine Toll. And the reason I don't like it is it's basically a beefed up version of Judgment on obviously a longer cooldown. And the thing is, I'm totally fine with the idea of talents giving you a beefed up version of a core ability if it replaces the core ability. It doesn't. And it can't. You know, you can't have what Divine Toll does on a Judgment level cooldown. It'd be far too powerful. And similarly, you can't just replace Judgment with Divine Toll, because then you're losing significant holy power builders, right? So for me, it just sticks out. Some people will like it, and that's fine. And it used to be over here. It used to be an end talent. My issue with it now, and yeah, you can bypass it, but my issue with it is it's on this row where, like, let's say, for example, you could easily want this. Let's say you wanted something like Ashes to Ashes Empyrean Endowment, and you want a Virtuous Command in Final Reckoning, say. It's way easier to get both of those if you just take Divine Toll rather than, say, each, because you'd have to take each of these in turn. You know, you're having to spend a lot more. If you wanted that combination, you have to take Divine Toll realistically. I'm not saying you necessarily would want that combination. Other changes. Now, this is it's not a, I don't know that it'd be fair to call it a bad one, but it's a questionable one. So they've moved Execution Sentence to the end. Now, I'm totally fine with that, by the way, because I don't know how Execution Sentence is often funny. It's one of those abilities that I think the sweet spot for it is if it's something that a good player will always take for single target. It has to, if it's not the best talent to take for single target, then it's worthless. But I also feel, because there's some skill required, and in Dragonflight there's a little bit extra skill required, because, just to remind you, so the hammer falls over 8 seconds. Okay, perfectly normal. And then it does amount of damage plus 20% of whatever damage you do in that 8-second window. So there's some skill there in being able to sort of buff it, and that's where like Final Reckoning would be pretty useful, because they're on the same cooldown, 1 minute cooldown. Really handy to put Final Reckoning down when you put Execution Sentence down, so that you can maximize that damage. So there is skill to using Execution Sentence, and I think the sweet spot would be for a skilled player who practices a lot. It should be an auto take for a pure single target fight, but maybe not a DPS increase for someone to take if they're not as accomplished, because if they're not going to maximize their damage, then it would be a DPS loss to use it. I think that's ideally what you'd see. So putting it at the end suits me. The query I have is with the talents that follow it. So we have, first of all, Executioner's Will, which was there before. The numbers may be different, I can't remember, although it looks similar. So your Execution Sentence hammer falls over 8 seconds, but in that window, hitting Templar's Verdict extends it by another second. So depending on your holy power, you could get 2 or 3 extra seconds out of this. So that's more damage, of course, and that helps against single target. No problem, great. Then you've got another one. So Execution Sentence now, instead of the 20% of your damage during that window, it's 15% of that damage during that window, but it does it to nearby enemies within 8 yards of your target. So it turns it into an AoE ability. And you think, oh, that's interesting, you know, so it could be used in AoE fights as well. But then you think it through. Now, I could be wrong, but immediately what I think to this is, hang on a minute. So you're going to use this on ads, right? How's that work? Because first of all, you've got to go into the ads. You've got to use your execution sentence. There might be a couple of seconds before you're ready to use it. Then you've got your 8-second window before it explodes with this extra damage. Are those ads going to be alive in like what might be 10 seconds? And if they are going to be alive in 10 seconds, are they going to have enough health that it's worth spending this talent point so it get extra explosion on them? My worry is that the ads like that, you tend to want to burst them down very quickly. It's not always going to be the case, of course, but it tends to be the case you want to burst them down very quickly. And I would just worry if you took this, that you're going to find a lot of the time, by the time your execution sentence falls, the ads are dead. Or if they're not, they're on the last legs and the burst damage, yeah, it might finish them off, but it's not going to do that much actual damage. It's not worth the talent point when there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of talents you might want to spend your points on here. So I have a query about that as well. But in general, in terms of the other thing I will mention is they have gotten rid of Long Arm of the Law. So in terms of mobility, I mean, Divine Steed, a lot of people don't like Divine Steed because you're on a horsey, and I totally get that. I mean, I've said to people, I massively approve of the fact that Divine Steed seems to exist purely to humiliate Tauren Paladins. I'm totally on board with that. They shouldn't be a thing. But it's, you know, it's not really great. But Blizzard are insisting on it. It's flavourful, so we're stuck with it. You know, 4 talent points though to get it to be decent. I mean, I think it is decent. If you've got 5 seconds 100% boost, 2 charges on a 45-second recharge, and that's what you get if you spend your 4 talent points. I think that's all right. Yes, there are melee DPS who have much quicker ways of getting into and out of a danger zone. Sometimes it's instant, like with a blink or a teleport, and sometimes it's just very quick, like a charge or a leap. You know, we don't get that, but, you know, we're not the worst off. I think, you know, it's better than, for example, Death Knights. But Long Arm of the Law, for me, would have been really good for Mythic Plus Dungeons at least. It's just that, not in its form of the last build. I mean, it was a 20% speed increase when you judged a target for 2 seconds. I mean, that's rubbish. For me, the 2 seconds was absolutely fine. It's a really short burst when you do your judgment. For me, it wanted to be 40 to 50% speed increase, and I'd have been quite happy with that. But they've removed it altogether. Doesn't mean it won't come back, but, you know, if they've removed it, you're certainly thinking they've minded to get rid of it, because they easily could have stuck it in somewhere here, because I think they've slimmed down in some ways this talent tree as well. So those are my thoughts on the talent trees. Now, I am going to cover what are, I think, a couple of, I think, 3 abilities that are problematic for the Retribution Paladin, 2 of which are baseline, 1 of which is not. And I'm going to start with the Retribution Aura, because this for me is a massive problem. So we've had this thing since Bloody Legion, and it's degenerate. You know, you get a DPS boost when people die. Absolutely rubbish. So, you know, when you're wiping and stuff like that, assuming you're not the first one dying because, you know, really squishy, then, okay, you're getting a DPS boost. It's of no value because by the time you're ready to kill the boss, people aren't dying. You don't want people dying, right? Now they've added in another thing. It's not implemented yet, but it's coming, unless they just sneakily remove it. So when any party or raid member within 40 yards takes more than 50% of their health in damage, again, that it's not clear exactly what that means. You gain Seraphim for 6 seconds, can't occur more than every 30 seconds. Now, you think about it this way. So, for a Mythic raid, it's all about reducing damage, as well as maximising DPS, of course. But you need to reduce your damage. You don't want to be dying. You don't want to be standing in the fire. Otherwise, you're just not going to beat that Mythic boss, right? So, in that environment, a Mythic Retribution Paladin that's already struggling because they don't bring utility, they don't bring their own way to manage normal levels of incoming damage, is now got an ability that buffs their damage that's not going to get much use. I can see the Seraphim proccing a few times, of course, but it's not going to get that much use. Whereas if you think about a normal or heroic raid, now in normal or heroic, first of all, the average level, not picking on people, but the average level of skill is going to be lower, of course it is. And also, because people can take the piss, so your DPS whores are going to deliberately stand in fire. They'll piss off the healers, or maybe some healers don't mind. Bit of challenge. But because it doesn't just kill them, like it would in Mythic all the time, they'll deliberately stand in there to maximise their damage. So they'll be taking lots of damage. You can also take a few deaths without causing wipes. So there's much more scope for Retribution Aura to work its magic in a normal or heroic raid than there is in something like a Mythic Plus dungeon or especially a Mythic raid. So what do Blizzard do to balance it? Do they say, well, let's just let Ret Paladins be the kings of normal and heroic raiding? All right, fine. I bet they don't. What are they more likely to do? They're more likely to say, well, we can't have them be the kings of normal and heroic raiding, can we? That'd be ridiculous. So we're going to have to tune it down, the rest of their damage. Well, that hurts them in Mythic, where they're not getting that much benefit from Retribution Aura anyway. They're getting some benefit, and they'll get they will get, you would hope, some serious benefit now, even on kill fights, but nowhere near as much. So you're hurting them for Mythic raiding. Two other abilities, and it's the same issue really, that cause a problem. First of all, Exorcism. I've mentioned this one before, but I might as well stick it in because it is an issue. Yes, you don't have to take it. Yes, it's not a gateway talent to anything else. You can just leave it out. You can just go, do you know what, let's not have it. But it doesn't generate holy power, and it doesn't consume holy power. So it's most unlike virtually every Retribution damage ability, because, you know, we work on the basis of building up holy power and then spending the holy power. You get this little cycle going. You stick something like Consecration, which I haven't actually, does it still do quite a lot of damage? Yes, it still does a fair amount of damage, but it's not real, and you're going to use it as part of your rotation if you take it. And it maybe Sims will even say, yeah, take it, it's really good, but it just doesn't sit right because it doesn't interact with your normal DPS cycle. And then the other one, and this one's worse for me, is Consecration, because you are going to, Consecration is baseline, so there's no say in the matter, you are going to end up using it. There will be times when you sort of need to use it. It is a damage ability at the end of the day. Even on single target, there'll be times when you use it. There's lots of talents that play with it that don't necessarily even lend themselves to the AoE side of it. It's like, even for single target, given that you're going to use it anyway, you may take it, like Consecration's damage being increased by 10%, for example. It's like, yeah, you might as well. If you're going to take it anyway, and you've got the talent points available, which is, you know, you may or may not have, then you may take that. So, and the thing with Consecration is, like, obviously it's a core Paladin ability and has been from the start. But I remember, so I took a break in Wrath of the Lich King because I thought the game, the first tier was rubbish, and then I didn't realise the next tiers were going to be awesome. and then I came back at the end of Cataclysm, and Ret I thought was in a mess, absolute mess. Then they tidied it up for Mists of Pandaria, and Ret, I think that's the expansion where Ret just lost Consecration. I was delighted. We didn't really need it. And then I think it came back, if memory serves, I could be getting like hazy in my old age. I think memory serves, it came back a few years later, and some people were really happy about it, and I was thinking, no. What? No. Because again, it makes it tricky to balance everything else if you've got an ability that's going to have to be used, but probably shouldn't be as part of your toolkit. So I think, yeah, I mean, but the Exorcism you can just not take. There's absolutely no reason to take it if you don't want to. I've put it there because it's cool. But the Consecration, not only is it baseline, but you've got various talents that buff it. So it's going to be a core feature. And I think that can cause a few issues as well. But those are my thoughts anyway on the latest. As I say, I'll go back to the positive, which is that Blizzard did make large changes, which, you know, I think some of them were not better changes, but it does show that they're making changes, and therefore any constructive criticism that goes their way, which, remember, not only includes why you have a problem with something, not just doesn't feel fun, because Blizzard have a very funny idea of fun, but practical objections with sensible solutions, may well reach an appreciative audience at Blizzard. So we'll just have to see how it goes. We may not get, I mean, we've had some rapid fire builds here. We may not get them every week. It might be that there's weeks before we get another one. But until Blizzard actually come out and say we're done with the Ret spec now, I'll retain some hope that we'll get some things here. And my main concern, as I say, is that they're not really addressing the damage reduction or utility issues in the Ret tree. But there it is. Those are my thoughts anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below. And until next time, I'll see you later.